Others. So my name is Ashley Schmeltzer. For those of you that don't know me, I'm a GIS officer with the American Red Cross, and I've been supporting this unit and this work for a little over 3 years now, I believe. And I'm joined by Dan Joseph.
Hi, everyone. Also a GIS officer here at American Red Cross.
And so we're just going to give a brief presentation today on some of our work with community mapping and drone mapping, and using our experience from Belize that we did earlier this year, I believe, and some of our lessons coming out of that. And then we'll leave some room for questions and move forward. So a little bit of overview on where this project came from. Back in 2017, in July, we did a workshop with the Belize Red Cross to introduce them to our tools and technology and kind of orient them and volunteers to what open source data is and the technology that they can use to contribute to open data and how it can enhance their programs. It was more of just a general workshop though. It wasn't too much in depth. They got a little bit of hands-on experience going out in the field and collecting actual data points, but nothing too extensive. And they got really excited about it. And a year later, they asked us to do another one. But this project for them, they were focused a little bit more on improving their relationships with government agencies in emergency response. And so we also knew that they were buying drones, and one for themselves and one for the government. And so we took the opportunity to do a little bit more of an advanced training, trying to integrate not only our community mapping tools, such as our field papers or OpenMapKit that we've used before, but in addition, trying to open up to drone imagery, how that improves community mapping, looking at street level imagery with Mapillary and different other tools. And this time really getting down to making sure that they could use those tools themselves so that they're not reliant on us to come back and help them do this in the future. So we'll go over those tools a little bit, not in too much detail, but just an overview. And then we'll look at some of the lessons that we learned from it, and then what we're kind of focusing on next. Our community mapping tools, this isn't anything too unfamiliar for the American Red Cross. We've been investing in these resources, and we're trying to continue to improve and facilitating easier mapping processes. So we do focus on OpenStreetMap, a collaborative project that is used to have a free editable map of the world. We appreciate this data set because it is used by more than one person. It's not just going to sit on somebody's laptop so nobody else can use it. And then we have tools that kind of help facilitate data collection for OpenStreetMap. We have more of a paper-based, which is the field papers that we'll go over. We have mobile-based, which is our OpenMapKit, which feeds off of what some might be familiar with in OpenDataKit. There's ways to track GPS tracks that can be added into OpenStreetMap, like with OpenStreet or OSM and then we really support remote tools or working with tools that don't need internet. So there's our portable OpenStreetMap tools that we've been investing in to be able to serve as that offline server to collect and house and store that data. So we'll go a little bit over some of these. But before we even go right into the tools, one of the things that we kind of worked on with the Belize Red Cross was everybody is always asking us, so what should I map? And it's kind of turning the question into what do I want to know? So we spent a lot of time in the beginning of one of our days in the session with the Belize Red Cross, really focusing at the programs that they're using to answer questions that they want to know for emergency response. So we've seen this with the Red Cross in general. There's the VCA, the vulnerability capacity assessments that go on where people are collecting geographic features. There's the CBHFA, which is the community first, it's a health community project. And there's different map features that they can focus on there. Sometimes when we were working with, I believe, the Belize Red Cross in the beginning, they were interested in emergency and evacuation shelters. So they can look at features that if they're looking at hospitals or big facilities such as schools where they can house people in cases of emergency. They can easily identify these features beforehand. So really what we wanted to do was go through, and OpenStreetMap has a little bit more of a, you have to know the features that are possible to map and the language used. So we went over the details of that, and this is just a snapshot of what that looked like and trying to have people use the resources that are already available online to be able to map these features. So there's highway features, which are roads, tracks, there's different water, streams, all these kind of features that people can add data to. We can have a house and label it as residential or commercial, and this like further helps people identify what they need to tag things as when they're using these tools and resources. So for those of you that are familiar with our OpenStreetMap and our Missing Maps program, the first step is getting that base layer of information, just doing simple tracing of features. And as you can see, the backdrop of this imagery is not the greatest or clearest, but it is workable in lots of settings. But this is one of the reasons why we also went into helping them use drone imagery, which Dan will go into a little bit later on some of the benefits and processes of that. But this is the first step to getting that base layer, is just tracing the imagery of identifying, yes, this is a building. And then the community mapping tools that we discussed are adding that second layer of detail of this is a house, or this is a residential building, this is a commercial building, and so forth. One of those tools that we talked about were the field papers. It's really just chunking out the map and letting people go forward and be able to take this and identify on the ground what they're looking at. Is that house, that residential? They can make codes to say this is an address, this is a hospital, and so forth. It takes a little bit of pre-work to identify what codes you're using and what you want to map. Again, focusing on the features of what you want to map beforehand and doing a mapping project is really important, so you're not just setting out to cover everything unless that's really our goal. But we really try and emphasize narrowing it down, and if you're really only interested in knowing if there's a house or not, focusing on that versus every detail possible that OpenStreetMap can add. There are pieces of this that you then have to consider, like doing the actual data entry. You have to go back and upload into the OpenStreetMap database what you've just collected. So some of that ease we try and take off that burden in going through the OpenMapKit, which is on the right-hand side. You'll see that photo of entering data using the mobile phones. When you go out into the field, there are you can pre-upload data sets defined to, just as you would with Open Data Kit, where you have a questionnaire that's asking certain questions to ask volunteers or in the community. You can also do this with features of, you can identify if the house is there and add the residential, commercial, and restrict what you want people to add for detailed information. It is easier if people aren't really good at geographic orientation with the paper-based. If it's for rural areas, you can use it of being able to easily identify a feature because you can have the geolocation on the phone, which will help. So really a balance sometimes is necessary depending on what audience you're working with and what they're more comfortable with in using and how you've set this up. So those are kind of some of the tools that we've already worked with and are familiar with in getting OpenStreetMap data with more detailed information in the community. And now I'll hand it over to Dan to look at some of our other tools that we've been using.
So one of the tools that we introduced that we're excited about is street level imagery collection. So a number of years ago, Google kind of introduced us to this concept where they sent out these cars equipped with fancy camera rigs and collected 360-degree view of a lot of cities and towns and things like that. And you could go places you hadn't been before and see what it looked like if you were driving or walking in that area. Since then, there's a number of projects that have emerged that allow people to kind of collect their own street level imagery and upload it to a platform and share it and use it in new and interesting ways beyond just viewing it in the web browser. You can do it with a variety of different tools. You can use an app on your phone or any camera with a GPS chip inside. We are big fans of the Sony action cameras. They've proven to be rugged and reliable, and you can mount them all sorts of places, whether it's the inside or outside of your vehicle, on your shoulder, on your bicycle, things like that. So really a variety of ways to run around with these. Street level imagery gives you access to details that aren't visible in aerial imagery, like the satellite imagery we were looking at earlier, and some of those examples for tracing the OpenStreetMap. You can add or confirm the existence of amenities on the map, like this pharmacy that you see in this picture. You can see in the map preview in the lower left, it's been tagged into the database already. And Mapillary and OpenStreetCam, those two projects where people can upload their own imagery, both make their imagery easily accessible in the various OpenStreetMap editors so people can use it to update the map. Here's another feature that we collected while in Belize that already existed in OpenStreetMap and actually had quite a bit of details already, had a phone number and name and all that. Somebody else had done a survey in the area. But if you look at the imagery, we can see that there's an additional piece of information, an email address, and we were able to add that to the map using this street level imagery. Mapillary does some other cool stuff. They do feature extraction, where they have a number of different things that they can use computer algorithms to recognize in the imagery and automatically extract. And so here you can see they've identified that there's a stop sign in this image, and then they've created a map layer that actually shows where that image, or where that feature is located on the map. And this is made available in the OpenStreetMap editors as well. So people can use this to more quickly add some of these features. They don't have to search through every single image that's been uploaded. They can look at the feature layer and say, oh, I want to add, stop signs in my city, and use the Mapillary layer to add that more quickly and efficiently. Here's just another example of a sign, but they don't do just signs. They've also done features such as fire hydrants, crosswalks, benches, streetlights, sewer covers, and more. They actually currently extract 42 different types of objects as points that they then make available as a layer that people can use to help edit OpenStreetMap. People have used this imagery in a variety of different tools as well. This one is called Pick for Review, and allows people to set up tasks where they use different street level imagery to add additional details in a structured manner to OpenStreetMap. So here, somebody has used all the bus stops that are marked on the map in their city, and want people to use the Mapillary imagery, the street level imagery, to then add additional details about the type, whether it's a shelter or only a pole or just markings on the street. And people can kind of much more quickly go through all the tasks for the city and add these additional details, which can be important if you're doing something like an accessibility map, a transit map, or some other study of your community. I mentioned an accessibility map. So here is a task where they're using the imagery to look at the access on either side of a crosswalk and say whether it's handicap accessible or not. Street level imagery can also be used to capture a snapshot of a location in time. This can prove useful in an area that's rapidly changing, for example, in the aftermath of a disaster, when there's that sudden influx of widespread damage and destruction that occurs quickly. And then also during response and recovery operations where there's large investments in addressing those damages that just occurred, being able to track that visually over time. And in other contexts too, such as a rapidly urbanizing area. The other technology we introduced were drones for mapping. So why drone imagery? Here's a GIF that's going back and forth between satellite and drone imagery. With drones, you can cover a much smaller area compared to satellites, but you get much better spatial resolution, easily getting 2 to 5 centimeter resolution compared to approximately 40 centimeter resolution. That's the max of available commercially through satellites right now. So, each pixel represents that on the ground. So at 40 centimeters, anything that's less than 40 centimeters across basically is impossible to see for the most part in the imagery. So having this extra resolution just makes it easier to understand what you're looking at when mapping. You also get better temporal resolution. You can launch a drone on demand and take advantage of breaks in inclement weather. You fly under the clouds, and assuming you processed it immediately afterwards, your imagery is about as up-to-date as it can be. What's the process for getting from the images from the drone to something you can use to map? Well, you take a lot of images. The drone is pre-programmed to fly automatically and collect images in a grid pattern across an area. that are then stitched together into one map product that you can use. They're able to be stitched together because of overlap and sidelap. So as the drone is making passes, each image along a pass, there's overlap between those. And then when it turns around and comes back and the adjacent pass, that line of imagery overlaps with the previous pass as well. We introduced the Belize Red Cross and their government partners to a number of different softwares. OpenDroneMap is an excellent open source free photogrammetry software for stitching together these drone images. And we've made it easy to install and use by including it in our POSM stack so that you can have a little portable server that is set up just through a USB install process and can be used to process your drone imagery. And then we also introduced them to OpenAerialMap, a platform online for hosting these completed map products that allow you to then easily access it in the OpenStreetMap editors and use it for that detailed mapping. We didn't have a lot of time to practice, and it's important to know all the settings of your drone. One of the lessons learned was that it's really important to read through the manual and get familiar with your particular model. My experience has been with different models of drones from the ones that they had purchased. And so having that limited amount of time for practice was kind of a hindrance. Also, it's probably better to train just 1 or 2 pilots at first. And people don't realize that the mapping missions aren't that exciting. We spend the whole time just monitoring the drone and being prepared to step in if something goes wrong. You don't actually fly it or do anything at all much except watch it if everything's going well. It's only when something goes wrong that you need to step in and unfortunately do something. And you can be easily limited by things like just the time you have in the day, weather conditions like wind, and the number of batteries, because it takes a lot longer to charge a battery than the flight time that you get out of a single one. And drones things can go wrong. Luckily, this wasn't during our training, but in the time since, both the Belize Red Cross and the Department of Natural Resources team have had incidents with their drone that resulted in some damage to the drone. And the Department of Natural Resources team had been flying, well before the workshop and had flown a lot more missions than the Belize Red Cross. So again, just checklists and being aware that this is a risk, and so taking that into account and training a lot and being aware of things.
So that kind of makes us dive right into our challenges and opportunities. With a lot of these technical-oriented trainings, we're usually given a short amount of time and just one-off trainings when we're working with national societies. This one was luckily a second training off of one that they had done before, but even as Dan had mentioned with the drone training, it's usually not a lot of time and to really embrace the tools and the safety needed, you need more time and continued training further on. I think they decided to start mapping again 4 or 5 months even after their initial training, which you just tend to forget even tips and tricks that you learned from before. So we're limited by that. Usually with the community mapping, just as when people ask, what should I map? They're considering community mapping not at the beginning of the program design, which would just really help in planning and making sure it's integrated well versus a one-off thing of then just having a bunch of extra features with nothing to do with them. Urban and dense settings still give us challenges, even with high spatial resolution of drone imagery, the tracing that you've seen, and even adding details. If you imagine going down on a road and looking at a building and there's 5 closely within one and you're not sure where one ends and one begins, they're just really difficult. And then developing regulatory environments for drones.
In various countries, the regulations around drones are either just getting put in place or potentially restrictive because of past bad experiences. So like in Nepal, where there was some chaos after the earthquakes with lots of people flying drones in an unsafe manner and endangering lives by getting them near helicopters that were manned and doing rescue flights and things like that. There's very restrictive regulations around the use of drones. And then in the Belize, where the regulations haven't really developed yet, there's some confusion between the Department of Natural Resources team and like what they were allowed to do and what Belize Red Cross was, like what altitude they were told they could fly at based on kind of just who they happened to talk to in the office that was regulating that on that day and the permission that they were granted for a particular activity. Just challenges around understanding and working within regulations that might not be really developed or thought out yet.
But then looking at opportunities, we saw a really good experience with Belize Red Cross where they engaged with the emergency management teams and continued that partnership after. And so when we're looking even with our other National Society partners, we think that's a really interesting model that they were building and would advocate that people continue to do that. And that strengthens use cases and preparedness efforts the more we continue to do these projects. And then just continuing to improve our user-friendly tools and investing in open source, that's an opportunity. And it kind of goes into some of the next steps of what we're looking at. We're refining our training models, whether it be a workshop on just introducing people and getting them into the idea of open source versus like, can we push multi-step training so that it's not that one-off short amount of time training. Hopefully we have more opportunities like that we're trying to work into, and we really want to integrate with Red Cross community projects. There could be opportunities to partner with Red Cross youth programs and community mapping for response, looking into that kind of possibilities in the future.
So OpenMapKit, the app we use to digitally collect additional details about OpenStreetMap features, was first developed now several years ago. And since then, there have been a number of technology improvements to the core OpenDataKit project that are opening up opportunities that didn't exist at the time. So we're exploring and hoping that we might be able to incorporate some of this OpenStreetMap data collection into the core OpenDataKit project and not need a separate app. So kind of streamlining and just making that whole process easier to maintain and train people on. Almost completed next step is distributed processing of drone imagery. So instead of having just one portable server, now you can have multiple linked together and have them work together to process a single task. So faster processing of large image sets and making it just that much more efficient, getting from the flight to using the product for mapping or other purposes. We want to improve the methodologies and SOPs for assessments by drones, given that they do cover a relatively small area in the amount of time you might have in a day. We think it's important to figure out ways to do statistical sampling or something like that to maximize the analysis that you can conduct in different situations. And we'd love to kind of work towards some guidance for using some of these tools in the more established methodologies that Ashley mentioned earlier, like VCA, CBHFA, the community-based health and first aid, and other IFRC Federation workflows that are used throughout the movement.
All right, and on that, we really are trying to keep these within 30 minutes so that they're not too exhaustive all the time. So we'll have about 6 minutes for any questions. I'll open it up for anybody on the line.
And Hank Hoff had a question. Besides official regulations, have you experienced negative feedback from the local community? You're spying on me, you can't take pictures of my property, etc. So every time that we've used drones, we've been careful to have a close community engagement element. We've done mapping missions with our recovery programs in the Philippines, where there were communities we've been working in for almost 2 years, and we made sure that the community representatives talked with the leadership in the community in general before we went and mapped. In Haiti, when we did mapping in Canaan, an informal area north of the capital, we were very careful to include extensive community engagement before we actually showed up with the drones, and also made sure that the Haitian Red Cross that were with us for the mapping were closely briefed on the technology and what we were doing, and had the key talking points to explain to the community. And in Belize, again, the Belize Red Cross was careful to communicate with the communities before we went on our activities.
And I see Colin had raised his hand. Colin, did you have a question?
Yes, hi everybody. Great presentation, thank you. Quick question. Similar to the IT telecoms world where it's governed by specific conventions, is there anything in disaster law that we as a Red Cross community are aware of, concerned about in going into countries that may have specific sensitivities? For instance, many countries going in and being able to map or trace military buildings or those types of infrastructure obviously is sensitive. So what are we doing to ensure that we're not stepping out of line, so to speak?
Close community engagement. In the Philippines, we communicated in addition to with the national authorities, also with the provincial and municipal authorities as well, about our activities before we were going. The countries that have established regulations, like the US and some of the others, usually have guidelines about you can't fly over military establishments, or in certain areas they have established regulations about areas where you can fly. So just abiding by those and careful communication before and after. And also, because we're working with the communities, like we know, like we would know if it's a risky area or there's something sensitive and some reason we wouldn't want to fly.
Great, thank you.
Might have a question or time for one more question if there's anybody. Going once, going twice. All right, thank you everybody for listening to that presentation. If you do have further questions, I know we went through a lot of the technology pieces fairly quickly, so feel free to reach out to myself and Dan, and we'll be happy to collect those questions and either redistribute them if there's multiple that others can benefit from. So thank you everyone, have a great day.